So the Contender Series 2025 season probably won't be starting until August of this year, but I do think there probably is about now that the UFC is starting to look for the guys that they want to be putting on the Contender Series in this season. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about every single fighter that I think should be on the Contender Series. Now, I will admit, I thought that the 2024 season was a really good season. They had quite a few fighters on there that I really wanted to see on the show. Islam Dulatov probably being that number one guy, but I do think that there is still a massive list of fighters out there that I think are deserving of a UFC contract that I would love to see on the show, and if not on the show, I would love to see them in the UFC. Before I do get into it though, I do want to say the way that this video is going to be structured is I'm going to talk about every single weight class from the smallest guys to the heavyweights and then the women's divisions at the end, and I'm going to talk about just the main guys that I really am very much looking forward to seeing fight this year and could be on the Contender Series. Another thing as well is there's a lot of guys on this video that I think a lot of people will expect to be there but aren't there. Think of guys like Matish Pinhas, Lacen Kaita. Those guys are signed to Octagon, and people that are now signed to Octagon are no longer being released from their contracts to fight for the UFC. Felipe Lima did when he fought on short notice and now has become a pretty good prospect for the promotion. Octagon did make a public statement saying they're not going to be doing that anymore. KSW also has exclusive contracts. ACA also has a lot of fantastic fighters on their roster, especially at flyweight, all under exclusive contracts. So there probably will be quite a few guys that are in that situation that you may expect to see, but of course there will be a lot of people that I am definitely going to miss out in this video. So if you think that I've missed someone, let me know them in the comments and I can add them to my list. Another thing as well is I do feel like I have a lot of knowledge about MMA prospects. I would say probably more knowledge than most, but I definitely don't have the most. There are people out there that do dedicate all of their time to following MMA prospects. I think of guys like Sean Bitter, who does have a pretty decent following on Twitter. He does a great job following the prospects, and he's even hosting a prospect league, which he does every single year. I personally wish that I entered it, but when they announced it, I just wasn't really going through like the greatest time, and I didn't think that I could commit enough time to really kind of come up with a good team. And another one is MMA Prospects on Instagram. I think the MMA Matchmaker on Twitter also does a pretty good job following prospects, and there just is other guys out there that I think do a good job. So with that intro now out of the way, let's talk about the flyweights. The guys with the R beside them, that means that they're returning. These are guys that have been on the Contender Series before. Andres Luna Martiniti, the only loss that he does have is to the Brazilian fighter he fought in the 2023 season, whose name has of course slipped my mind, but he has gone 15-0 aside from the Contender Series. Sean Galsey actually won last year, but he wasn't signed because it seemed like he was holding back a bit. Maybe he was just nervous and the moment caught up to him. Duffy and Piccinini fought against each other, and that was a great fight. I would actually quite like to see them both come back. And Drilic lost to Galsey, but Drilic is also just a very powerful guy. Going through as well, the other flyweights that I do have here, Oscar Miguel is a very good finisher from Peru. Ismail Khan, I believe, is a fighter from Bangladesh. If not, he's from Bangladesh. I think he's from Pakistan. Kevin Fernandez is a pretty good prospect out of the USA. Paris Moran is the guy whose photo I am using there. I think that he had a fantastic 2024, defended his Fury FC belt twice, which is a pretty big deal. Marcos de Glees on a massive win streak right now. And Dennis Araujo is from Brazil, also on a pretty big win streak right now. And despite having 29 professional fights, he still is only 30 years old. And his most recent win did come over a 6-0 prospect. Moving up to Bantamweight. Bantamweight is a very stacked division in the UFC, so I feel like a lot of guys that do get signed from the Contender Series this year are going to have a lot to work against, which is why I feel like my list that I have is really stacked. Now, Lewis Lee Scott, I think, is the guy on this list that I would love to see in the promotion. He just got a massive win over Damate Pena at Ares FC, and Damate Pena has been a staple of Ares FC for a very long time now. But I do worry that he has been signed to the PFL, so maybe you have to exclude him. I'm not too sure, because I thought that he was signed to the PFL, but then he fought Damate Pena anyway, so that is what it is. The two returning guys, I have Hickson Zenadim and Reyes Cortez. Reyes Cortez has lost twice on the Contender Series, but he did have a pretty fun fight against Peyton Talbot and has already come back with a pretty big win. And he was fighting against Mana Martinez, but that was a no contest due to an eye poke, unfortunately. Aside from Lewis Lee Scott, Mitchell McKee's a really fun wrestler grappler from the USA. Colby Thickness, very talented guy from Australia. So is George Mangos. Other guys on there, Josh Walkins, 17-1. Admittedly, I genuinely only heard of Josh Walkins recently, and I know that he has a pretty important fight booked coming up. Adrian Luna Martinetti is the brother of Andres Luna Martinetti, who's the flyweight. Luciano Pereira, 14-1, 13 knockouts. Casey Tanner should be in the returning list. Actually, I apologize because he actually fought against Jun Matsumoto on the Contender Series in the past. He's coming off a big win himself. John Sweeney is a fighter that I'm a big fan of, but he did miss weight by like 8 pounds defending his LFA title recently, so that's kind of sucks for him, to be honest with you. And Aziz Osabek Ulu has recently started fighting in the US. And when guys from Kyrgyzstan, from Uzbekistan, from Russia start fighting in the US, it typically is them telling the UFC that they want to be signed. I know he does have a very experienced record, but he has got a couple of decent wins so far. And I do just have a little note at the bottom. Felipe Efrain, who is on a big win streak right now, knocked out Mana Martinez recently, is taking on Otari Tanzalovi, who fought Josias Musasa in 2024's Contender Series, and the winner of that should be on the Contender Series, or maybe get signed to the UFC if it is Felipe Efrain, because he did knock out Mana Martinez. Let's move on to featherweight. Featherweight's also a pretty stacked list that I do have a lot of very experienced guys. Michael as well just got a pretty big win over someone else that was on the Contender Series last year, Dorian Ramos. And then, of course, Luke Riley. Luke Riley is one of the best featherweight prospects right now. He was actually rumored to, and I think he was actually meant to, fight against Kevin Vallejos. That fight didn't end up happening. Luke Riley had some visa issues. If they can sort that out, I would love to see Riley versus Vallejos in the UFC. Tommy McMillan is a massive featherweight. This guy was meant to actually fight against Austin Bashi, but he had to pull out due to injury, which is a shame. But he's a really big featherweight with a lot of finishing potential. Rodrigo Vera is 19-1, fighting in Peru. They just can't find anyone in Peru to beat this guy at this point, and honestly, he has started to fight lower level competition because there's no one else for him to fight. I'd like to see him in the UFC. Marcio Barbosa is on a tier, 16 wins, 15 wins by KO. Jamie Siraj is a guy from Canada who I believe took a bit of time away from injury, but he's come back, he's on a win streak, he's looking good. Justice Torres is a guy from the US. I believe he fought once or twice for Bellator. Low-key has a big fan base. I see people talking about Justice Torres all the time. Rudy Gavidia, another guy from Peru with a ridiculous amount of experience. Harry Hardwick had a big year last year. He became the Cage Warriors champion. Very good Muay Thai and grappling to back that up. And Magnus Conrado is an experienced guy fighting for the LFA, and he is from Brazil. Lightweight. Once again, lightweight and bantamweight are two of the most stacked divisions within the UFC promotion. And I feel like to really make a name for yourself at 155 pounds, you have to be pretty good. George Hardwick did really, for lack of a better term, fumble the bag in Contender Series 2022, but he has fought once since then, and I would like to see him on the Contender Series again. Maybe Hardwick wasn't as good as we all thought he was, but he still is a very fun boxer from the UK. Gage Young had a really good fight against Quillan Salkild. He does look a little bit like he does need a little bit more experience, but I think by the time the Contender Series rolls around, he would have already fought again, so I think Gage Young is definitely ready for a second chance. Now, Yuji Yannick Ifoviga is a fighter that I'm a big fan of. He just got a pretty big KO win, not his last fight, but the fight before against an experienced opponent that had never been KO'd before. He's from Japan, and he's just really fun. He's really good. Mancho Kira, I believe he's from Bangladesh, so that could be quite cool, because I don't think the UFC's ever had someone from Bangladesh on their promotion. Marko Bockovic is a big-time finisher from Serbia, and I do have a couple of those guys. Or maybe he's from Slovenia, I do apologize if I got the name wrong there. Ambru Magomedov is the guy who's in the photo. He just looks like Khabib. and he fights like Khabib. Genuinely look the exact same. Richie Lewis is the LFA champion right now. Very, very good wrestler, is coming off a win over Keegan Genrich. Daichi Kamiya is a fighter that I just learned of very recently. He got a win in Australia. He come from Japan to Hex in Australia and got a pretty big upset win. He's a grappler. I believe he's got 4 or 5 wins by submission. So kind of think of like Rei Saruya, Tatsuro Taira, but at 155 pounds. Harry Webb is a great prospect. He's 5-0. Maybe a little bit inexperienced, but he is struggling to find fights right now. He's struggling to find opponents. I would love to see Harry Webb on the Contender Series. And then aside from that, James Power, great fighter with a lot of finishes in Cage Warriors and from England. And Amin Ayoub is from France. Has been rumored, but I don't know if they're from legitimate sources. He has been rumored to be in talks with the UFC for a long time, but they might not be true. But I do think that he would be quite fun to see in the UFC. The UFC is definitely going to be looking for more French talent if they're going back there. Speaking of French talent, I actually do have Jordan Zebo here. Jordan Zebo did get knocked out by Cedric Doumbé in about 4 seconds, which does kind of suck, but the PFL, I believe, have recently released Jordan Zebo, and if so, the UFC should just snatch him up, put him on the Contender Series, see how he goes. Zebo's like a 5'9" wrestler. He's pretty short but he's massive. He's got like a lot of muscle behind him. Justin Burlinson is my returning fighter. Burlinson went 16-1, 17-1, or something crazy on the amateurs. Coming to the pros, he unfortunately got his chin taken from him by both Reese McKee and also the Canadian on the Contender Series he fought a couple of years ago. Sad to see, but he is a talented guy, even if that chin isn't really there. Nikola Jokovic is 16-0. UFC, what are you doing? GFL, what are you doing? Sign this guy. Carlos Petrozella, 13-0, 12 finishes, I believe. Samanda Muradov, this guy's a future UFC champion. He's a future PFL champion. This guy's good. I think Muradov is the real deal. I'm a big fan of him. Thomas Gant, I believe, fought 7 times in 2024, albeit not against the best opponents, but he did fight 7 times and has been making a bit of a name for himself recently. Michael Oliveira is a big-time finisher from Brazil. Magomed Rasul Kakul Magomedov is a fun name to say, and I would like to see him in the UFC, so Angelo from We Want Picks has to pronounce it. Here's Dudes is 13-1. I believe he's from a country which has no UFC fighters, and of course it slipped my mind at this time. Taila Nuraji is a fighter from China, really fun fighter. Rodrigo Senzanando is from Brazil, but he is fighting in Canada, and he has been beating a very high level of competition recently, and he's been looking very good doing it. I would love to see Senzanando in the UFC. I would love to see Nuraji in the UFC. Tailaki Nuraji is really fun. He fought on the road to UFC, I believe, in 2023. At middleweight, I do have a few returning fighters, and I will admit, this list is pretty sad. So, if you know good middleweight prospects, please comment down below. I just struggled to find them, and I do have a few returning fighters, but for a couple of them, it really was to make up the numbers. Eli Aronov hasn't fought since he lost to Zach Reese in about a minute and a half by armbar, but he's got a big fight coming up against Will Curry at Cage Warriors 156, and Will Curry is a guy that I had higher hopes for, but he did lose to Jordan Santos, which was sad to see. Lucas Fernando's on a 2-fight win streak right now. I believe he actually fought against Azamat Bekaev and lost to him. Cam Roston, since he fought against Torres Finney and lost a pretty close decision, has won 2 or 3 times. I think he's won twice, but he's got a 3rd fight booked that he probably should win. And I know Mateo Duclos doesn't have a good record, 6-3, but he is a really fun striker when he gets it going. He didn't look that good on the Contender Series, I will admit, but if he could find 1 or 2 fights, I really wouldn't mind seeing Duclos on the Contender Series again, just because he is a pretty fun striker, and once again, he's from France. I do think that the UFC wants guys from France. Virgil Organ is a French wrestler. He really isn't that fun to watch, I will be honest. His style is quite boring, but he did beat a pretty good prospect in his most recent matchup. Teo Haig, I believe, fought for Bellator once or twice, but the real man of the slide, I guess you could say, is Azamat Bekaev. This guy's the LFA champion. He's beaten guys that are in the UFC, and recently Dylan Budka lost to Azamat Bekaev like less than 2 Bekaev fights ago, so probably about 12 to 18 months ago, and he's in the promotion, and Azamat Bekaev is not. Now, Bekaev, from my understanding or from what I heard, the UFC told Azamat Bekaev to put on an exciting performance or get a finish or something like that, and then they'll sign him. He got a KO in his most recent fight. I believe it was against an experienced opponent with a 19-9 record, whose name has slipped my mind, but Bekaev, he got a KO in his last fight. I mean, I guess you could put him on the Contender Series, but 18-3 at middleweight, where if I'm struggling to find them, I'm sure there's other guys out there, but yeah, man, I think that you're missing out by not signing Bekaev. He could be a pretty good prospect for the UFC. Light heavyweight, once again, a smaller list, I will admit, but there are some fun guys on there. Yili is 5-0. I believe 4 of his wins are in the first minute. He kind of is like the Zhang Ming Yang, but way less experienced. Would be fun. Uran Satubaldiev is the LFA champion right now at light heavyweight. And I think I'm missing someone. From this list. I know that there's another guy from the US that's up and coming at 205 pounds, and he's been fighting for... Oh man, I think he's been fighting for... I can imagine his Tapology photo. It's him holding a belt, and that's what's really annoying me. Let's just move on. At heavyweight, once again, pretty sad list, I will be honest, but the guy that I really, really want to see is Pavel Dalidko. This guy, I'm pretty sure, is from Lithuania. He was actually meant to fight Azamat Nuftalayev, but Nuftalayev pulled out and Dalidko knocked out somebody else. Nuftalayev, really good. I believe his only loss is to... the guy that the PFL signed. Oh no, guys, I've ruined the video at the end. You guys know who I'm talking about, I hope. The returning guys I do have is Hugo Cunha, LFA champion at heavyweight. Chandler Cole hasn't fought since he lost to Thomas Peterson, which kind of sucks, and I know that Chandler Cole isn't like the best fighter in the world, but he is so fun. He's 5'9" or 5'10" at heavyweight, and he's just fun. He's a knockout guy. He's cool to watch, and so is Eduardo Neves. Eduardo Neves just throws hooks. Chandler Cole versus Eduardo Neves is a fight that I just need to see at some point. I don't care if it's on the Contender Series or if it's on the LFA or whatever. I need to see it. And another fighter as well that I would like to point out is Jose Augusto. Jose Augusto, not the best record, but he has fought really good competition throughout his career so far. The women's divisions, once again, I don't really have too many, I will admit, but I do think I have a solid strawweight list. Julieta Martinez maybe could be the face of the UFC's atomweight division if they were to bring it in, but I think that the way that they would bring it in would be by signing Ryzen's champion, Seika Izawa, who's 14-0, I believe, right now. Other prospects I want to talk about is Aiza Bertolso. She has a really big-time amateur background, and she won the IMMAF championships in, I believe, 2022. She's been looking pretty good so far as a professional, getting quite a few finishes. Gigi Canuto, a very good grappler, but she did actually lose to Natasha Kuziatina, who is a little bit older. I think Natasha Kuziatina is 33, 34 years old, but if you look into her, she has a massive judo background, multiple-time European champion. I believe she's a bronze medalist at the World Championships. And also, Jacinta Austin from Australia, really good kickboxer, just all-around good fighter, really. I think that she should come into the UFC soon enough. She's fought good competition, fought all over the world, fought for Octagon, I believe, once or twice. And then for bantamweight, I have a couple of fighters. However, Kennedy Freeman very recently signed to the UFC. So as I was making a list and making the video, Kennedy Freeman signed to the UFC. So shout out to Freeman. I think that you should keep an eye out for her. I think she's going to debut in London. That card that's rumored to be headlined by Jack Della Maddalena versus Leon Edwards. And Freeman's cool. She's got 5 KOs or 4 knockouts. Just crazy power. She's fun to watch, and that's it for the video. So let me know what you think in the comments below. I've been working on the list itself since November of 2024. I think it's a pretty solid one. I really would like to see these guys and girls, of course, on the show. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys in the next one.